if I kept down the same path, there's no way that I'd be alive today. That experience opened my eyes and allowed me to see everybody else that I was dealing with on the law enforcement side very differently. From my perspective, in the moment, there were people that were not struggling with any issues. They were just bad folks that we needed to get off the street because they were going to hurt somebody.
After I have that first one, I'm no longer in control. I really wanted to quit. And then I would wake up the next morning and have no choice. I'd lost my identity and I didn't know who I was. I just had nothing left. And I needed help so bad. It all came down on me. I could not pull myself out of it. I had hit rock bottom. I just knew I was gonna die. And I remember just praying that foxhole prayer, like, God, please just get me through this moment. I'll stop doing bad. I will stop everything. The goal of my podcast is to not only educate people on, mental health, but also let people know that they're not alone.
Jon, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kevin.
How was your drive from Saratoga?
Beautiful.
It is nice,
it's it's one of those days, and I hate the cold, so as much as I can get out and be involved in a day like this, even if it's in the car with the windows down, it's just beautiful. So
yeah, are you originally from Saratoga?
No, I was actually born in Buffalo.
Okay.
So and I grew up there. Well, I say grew up as a little kid. So when at the end of elementary school, basically we moved out to into the Albany area and eventually into Saratoga. But so I'm a big Bills fan.
Are you jumping through tables? And
yeah, no, I haven't done. I'm getting a little older, but I did live close enough to the stadium when I was a kid, right on Abbott Road, where I could sit in the driveway and listen to the announcer back in the day in the early '90s when the Bills were great, and so that's kind of cool memories. But no tables, thankfully.
Yeah, how was early childhood for you? Any siblings?
Yeah, so I have 2 brothers and 1 sister. My don't really have a connection with my biological dad, so he kind of took off when I was 3. But my mom ended up remarrying really a great guy, and who I just consider my father. Right when I was 7 years old, and he's been in my life ever since, and he's my dad. Other than that, I would say I'm pretty traditional, kind of normal upstate New York kid. And went to public school, ended up graduating high school, pretty, again, relatively normal life with my brothers. And, they went to school and off to college, and I did the same thing eventually, but, took a track with the military a little bit, but no crazy stories, I would say.
Yeah. How was high school?
It was fine.
Sports?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean,
Typical,
I wasn't great, so I ended up going to a public school right outside of Saratoga, actually Ballston Spa, which is a district very close to Saratoga. And I did public school until my last 2 years, where I went to a small Catholic school in Saratoga called Spa Catholic, and it was much smaller, and so I had an opportunity to play more because I wouldn't have made any of the teams. Ballston was a pretty big district, and I love to play soccer. I was a soccer guy, and so I would have played in Ballston, but I never would have really played a lot, I guess. And I'd like to play basketball, but I'm awful. And so I got the opportunity to play at the Catholic school, which I would have never done in Ballston. So anyways, yeah, a little bit of sports.
So you graduate high school and you go into the Army.
Yeah. How
did you come about going into the Army?
It was the offer for college to pay for school. So I have family members that are in the military. My uncle was in, my grandfather was in, I have cousins that were in, and most of them were military intelligence, which is what kind of pushed me to that world, But anyways, the National Guard in New York, and other states do this too, but the National Guard in New York, either Army or Air, was willing to pay for college at a state school, at least, if you signed up for 6 years. And I did have siblings, and my sister was going to school, and there's only so much money to go around, right? So I didn't really want to get too much in debt, but I wanted to go to school. And so I kind of just said, there's some military in my family's background. They want to do intelligence. It sounds kind of cool. My cousin, for example, he was in Desert Storm doing intel stuff. And so I said, if they can do it, I can do it. So I originally signed up for 6 years without any purpose to, or any idea that I would stick around for any longer than that, right? I just do my 6 years, do my 1 weekend a month, and be done, and just pay for school and be out of there. But interestingly enough, here we are on 9/11. That day happens and totally changed my mindset. 9/11 happens. I get serious about what I was doing. find myself in Iraq in 2005, and then get really serious based on the whole deployment aspect and what we went through, and decided that I was going to stick this thing out, and I've been doing it ever since. So,
And ironically, we are shooting on 9/11.
Yeah.
That is insane. How many years prior were you when did you enlist in the Army? How
So
before?
it was May of '97, so the last month of high school.
Okay, so
Yeah.
4 years in, 9/11 happens essentially.
Yep.
And your perspective of things with the Army, your day-to-day changes in a much more serious manner.
Yeah, absolutely. You're a kid and you're just coming out of high school and you're just focused in your world
course,
and your bubble, right? And there's not, and I was a history guy, so I paid attention a little bit in high school as to what happened in World War II and all these things that happened across the world, but there's no real connection to any of that, right? It almost seems fictional in a way because it's so long ago. And then I'm standing there. I was actually working at a pizza shop at the time, and I was standing in the kitchen area of the pizza shop in the morning, and I'm watching what happens in the towers, and I'm like, it was a day where like the real world set in for me. Like, oh man, this isn't stuff that's just in books, and oh my God, I'm in the Army, and National Guard, but still I'm in the Army, and holy smokes, like. So I remember getting the phone call that day. They're calling all the guards folks to come in and be like, listen, we're activated, get your crap and get down here to the unit. And so that's what we all did. And we were coming out of college and whatever we were doing. And we made it down to the armory that day. And we kind of waited around and we were waiting for orders. What are we going to do? Who's going to go where? What are the unit, And a whole bunch of people ended up going down to New York City that day and ended up being there for months. And I didn't end up going for a whole bunch of reasons, but a whole bunch of my, colleagues and friends and stuff went down there and did what they did to help out as best they could. And that's it. That like changed the mindset. Like, oh man, the real world does exist in that way. And there's bad people out there. And what does this all really mean? So I started to read more and pay more attention and just getting more involved at drill. Like, I just want to make sure that I know what I'm talking about and doing the right thing. And then we get orders. It's not orders yet, but it was, a warning that we were going to end up going to Kosovo, my unit, ended up going to Kosovo in 2003. And we were like, oh man, okay. But then it ended up switching and it became Iraq in 2004. And then we made it to Fort Drum in 2004 and then Iraq in 2005. And again, that's when it really turned serious, if you will.
What was Iraq like? We had, if I remember correctly,
Yeah.
The shock and awe was in 2003.
Yeah,
I
March
think.
of 03, yeah.
March of 03.
Yeah.
And then it was, we're helping them redevelop their government
Sure.
and restructuring things.
Yep, that's exactly right.
So 2005, you go into Iraq. Where are we as a country in Iraq helping them reform in a way?
Great question. So 2003, like you said, was the initial invasion. President Bush said it, shock and awe, right? Mm-hmm. Takes very, very little time to get out of Kuwait, get into Baghdad, and just in a mere couple of weeks. And then we end up starting a transitional government. So they put in charge this guy by the name of L. Paul Bremer. He worked for the State Department, and he became like the king in a way. He was the senior leader of Iraq's transitional government in 2004. And he was in charge of ensuring that the schools could reopen. And, obviously we were there in support, the military, the State Department. And it wasn't just the U.S. Britain was there, and the Aussies and Canadians were all there. And, trying to make sure that all this stuff can happen and get back on their feet. And at the same time, in 2004 is developing the Constitution. So we had to create an environment, hopefully we tried to create a safe enough environment where these politicians can get involved and say, we were senior politicians in the Saddam regime. Obviously, we didn't have a lot of power, but we still were considered senior, local governors, that kind of thing. And they coalesced and they came around this framework and said, we're going to develop a constitution, and they did. And our time started, my unit's time started in the very, very beginning of 2005. And this is after the initial Constitution was written in 2004, and they started to vote on what they wanted the Constitution to be like, and then what the legislature would look like, and they started voting for their local representatives. That was the time when I was there. So it was like the election time. And so if you as a matter of fact, if you served in Iraq during Iraqi freedom, there are 3 different campaigns that you can be associated with based on your time. So campaign number 1 was the initial invasion in 03. So there's like a start date and an end date. If you were there, you were during the initial invasion. Then there's the election time frame. So if you were there in 04, 05-ish, that was the elections. And then afterwards was the surge. And if you were there during the surge, you got the surge campaign medal. And then after that, there were none. So we were there in the second part. Right, the election time frame. It was kinetic. There was a lot going on.
Okay, so what was the gentleman's name after Saddam Hussein?
You mean the L. Paul Bremer. He was the American that was put in charge to transition from Saddam to the government that they were forming on their own.
And they were electing their new leader, essentially.
Yep. So basically what happened is the United States and our allies came in and said, here's what's going to happen. Saddam's gone. All right. That whole concept of dictatorship and it's out of here. Here's what you need to do. And it's not just the US, right? We had conversations with the UN and the UN voted on this and got on board. So it wasn't just us. But we developed a framework, like a box. And we said, listen, you're going to have a representative government. You're going to let the people get involved. And, you can't do certain things, right? You can't exclude women. You can't exclude certain races. You can't exclude certain religions. But above and beyond that, however you want to do it, you do it. So as long as they met those criteria that the president wanted and the UN wanted, they did their own thing. So we said, here's your framework, figure it out.
Wow.
And they had a lot of discussions and meetings and conversations, and then they had mini votes, and they were like, okay, let's do it this way. And they ended up setting up a constitutional republic, which is what they have today. And that's based mainly on the parliamentary system of Britain. So they have a prime minister, they have a president, they have a vice president, and really the prime minister is the political leader of the country. The president is kind of the figurehead. But they broke it up nicely. So the president will always be a Kurd, which is the Kurds never had any authority in Iraq, even though they make up, over 25% of the country in the north. And the head of the legislature will always be a Sunni, and the prime minister will always be a Shia Arab. So no matter what they say, that's been voted in, and that's rock solid in the Constitution. They'd have to change the Constitution to do that. So they made some smart decisions. They made some poor decisions, but they made some smart decisions. But any young democracy does. So
jumping ahead a little bit, have they been able to keep those rules and regulations implemented into their constitution to this day? Like the inclusive, like you have to have females, you have to have all races. Is it still like that today?
Yep, absolutely. So the current president in Iraq is Kurd, and I can't recall the prime minister's name, but he's Shia, and the head of the legislature is Sunni. Females, I think they make up almost 30% of the legislature in Iraq right now. So now, there's still a whole lot of things they have to figure out, as you might imagine, right? All the daily stuff of running a government and who does the water and all these things. And they got a long ways to go. I mean, one of the arguments that is that we talk about in my world, right, in the foreign affairs world a lot, is what was Iraq and the region better off at the time with Saddam in power, where he at least kept the Iranians, who are often meddling in Iraq today, kept them at bay. And he was awful, obviously. He was awful to his own people. He gassed his own people in 88. We all know, all those things. Saddam was a bad guy. But from a regional perspective, was that better? Because Iran was in its place, in a sense. Well, Saddam leaves in 03, and now there's a significant Iranian influence in Iraq. There are Shia politicians that are tied in directly to the leadership, to political and religious leadership in Iran. And we're struggling now with Iraq as an ally to ensure that influence doesn't push too far against the Kurds and the Sunnis, who have a right to be involved in the government as well. So, Iran is running around the Middle East funding proxies all over the place, the Houthis down in Yemen, right? And then you have Hamas in Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon. Well, they're also funding what they call the Shia militia groups in Iraq, and they're constantly attacking U.S. soldiers in Iraq. And because they want to get their way, and they want things done their way, and if they can't get it through the political system, they get mad and they fight. Well, that's all coming from Iran. All the money's coming from Iran, all the support's coming from Iran. So, and Iran has a significant influence on those senior Shia leaders. So today there's people like, General Petraeus, who are still having conversations like, what was better? Was it I think ultimately the way Iraq is today is better off for the long term. Right? Saddam was a bad guy, and the day that if he ever left, it would have been his sons who were even worse. Uday and Qusay were just vicious. They were animals. They weren't people. And so I think they'll get it figured out. Right? Iraq will get it figured out. They'll be able to stand up on their own eventually, completely. I mean, they are now. I don't want to leave everyone with the impression that they're not doing their own thing. They are. But again, they got a lot of influence from outside actors. So I think they'll get there.
Yeah. How long were you in Iraq for?
So I made it I landed in January of 2005 and then left in November of 2005.
Okay.
Yeah, so about 10 months.
Yeah. So you're there about 10 months. What happens? What do you do after Iraq? You come back to the U.S.?
Yeah.
And you're working intelligence here in the U.S.?
Yes, but for the DEA. So what happened was there's this program in the National Guard specifically that's called the Counter Drug Task Force. And what that task force does is it takes federal money and takes money and it gives it to soldiers and purchases equipment that National Guard soldiers can use in support of law enforcement that are battling the war on drugs, if you will. And there is a counter-drug program in each state that falls under this big umbrella, right? Prior to me going in 2005, I became part of that program, but I was only on the program for a couple of months before the deployment came up. And some people get confused by this. So yes, I was in the National Guard, but you can have full-time jobs in the National Guard. So sometimes you're part-time and you're just doing 1 weekend a month. And then sometimes you can be full-time and you're doing whatever you're doing, right? So this counter-drug program is one of those full-time jobs. Started working on that program a couple of months, went to Iraq, came back, and an analyst position opened up at the DEA office locally where I live. And so I started doing counter-narcotics analysis based on my experience as a military intelligence soldier for the DEA and the locals, because we work with the troopers and the rest of them, and just working on their cases. And that's where I learned about wiretaps. That's where I learned about surveillance. That's where I learned about all of that law enforcement stuff while I was working there for about 3 years until about 2008. Yeah.
Okay. Can you take us through some of your wiretap adventures?
Yeah. So I don't have so many from the DEA side, right?
Okay.
Because as an analyst, you can't sit wires, you don't listen to calls, you don't do those things. Right?
Yeah.
You're just in a supporting position, especially because I'm in the military. The military can't do law enforcement work in that way. Right? The Posse Comitatus Act says that the military in a National Guard status can support federal law enforcement in certain ways. Like we could do crowd control, we could do weather events, we could do analysis that supports law enforcement investigations, but we don't do anything in terms of evidence or investigations or any of that stuff. So as an analyst, I'm doing link diagrams. I'm doing research on people, and I'm saying this guy's tied to this guy, and this guy knows this guy, and he's living over in this house or whatever. And then we present all that stuff to the agents, and the agents use that to go on and further their investigation. So I know about how they do their work, but I can't do it, right? I didn't start doing that until 2008 when it just so happened that we were working. The DEA office was working a couple cases with the New York State Attorney General's office. There were cases they were working together. And the boss in the New York State Attorney General's office that was working at the building with me had a position open. And so he came in and he said, hey, there's a job opening. Sometimes we hire retired law enforcement that have been on for a long time and have a lot of experience, but sometimes we hire people that don't have any experience, at least from a law enforcement perspective. We'll put them through the academy, get on the job, and we'll make you an investigator, So maybe you try, just see what happens. And I'm like, you know what? All right, I can see. I've been doing this support to the law enforcement guys for 3 years. This is fun stuff, and this is a New York State job, and we'll see. I went and interviewed and got hired and ended up in the academy, and there we go. So that's where my career started with the Organized Crime Task Force, with the Attorney General's office, when I started doing wires on my own. And so as a lead investigator, fully sworn officer, the whole nine, and did that for 14 years.
So that started, you went into the
08.
academy in 2008.
I did.
And then you did that all the way up to 2022.
Right, when I started and came back doing full-time Army stuff. But for 14 years, I was doing cop stuff. Yeah.
So you jump right in and you are doing intelligence on organized crime families, organized crime individuals that are in that life.
Yep.
And what is that like?
It's a lot of fun. Really. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. So I work for the Organized Crime Task Force. It's a small group, again, that falls under the Attorney General's office in New York. Not every Attorney General's office, not all of them have what we call organized OCTF offices in their state. We just happen to have one here. And we have offices spread throughout the state, Buffalo, Syracuse, and Albany, and then some down in New York. And it was initially set up in the 70s, late 70s and the 80s to do organized crime, what you'd consider your traditional wise guy organized crime stuff. So the traditional organized crime stuff that you would imagine, right? Italian family organized crime, which still actually does exist. Not a lot of it does exist, but it's still around. But that was the initial intent of OCTF. Eventually, the organized crime stuff, it kind of, at least around here, when I say here, I mean Albany, transitioned more into local gangs and narcotics stuff. And so while the Organized Crime Task Force down in New York City does some wise guy stuff, most of the OCTF offices across the state do, again, local gang stuff, guns, gangs, drugs, that kind of thing. Big narcotics investigations. And that's where I did most of my work. So the four times I was an affiant, meaning I was a lead of an investigation, they were all either a gang case or a narcotics case.
Were you seeing, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Were you seeing more the rise of gangs more so than organized crime?
Yeah,
families?
so we consider gang work types of organized crime in a way, right? So it falls under that umbrella.
Yeah.
Because they are organized in a sense. They have somebody who's in a hierarchy. There's somebody who has a source of supply, and then usually has some people that sell for them, and those dealers sell for other people. And, so there's a structure that you could build there. So it's organized in a sense. And, but the gang stuff, again, at least locally across upstate New York, is really more localized. And what I mean is that, in Albany, for example, there are Albany gangs, there are Troy gangs, there are Schenectady gangs. There aren't a lot of national gangs in our areas here, right? So Bloods, Crips, that type of stuff. It's not that they don't exist. It's just that they don't have the presence that the local gangs do. So a lot of these are the kids that come up through high school, hanging out with their buddies, and then they eventually get involved into illegal activities, selling guns, selling drugs, whatever. They label their group a name of whatever it is, right? The Orange Street Boys in Albany, for example, a way old school name. Those guys aren't around anymore, but that's an old gang from the 90s. But anyways, and it's those guys. And then they end up having a beef or whatever with the guys in Troy, and then they are battling back and forth or whatever. So, my office did do a blood case. I can't remember what we called it, blood sport maybe, in the early years when I was on 2010-ish time frame, or maybe we called it Red Alert, Operation Red Alert. Anyways, and we were investigating some bloods that were in Albany, and they were legitimate. They had meetings, they wore red, they had a national tie, they were talking to people that were leaders inside of the federal prison system. They only took orders from those people that were contacting them through the prison system. They didn't make decisions on their own. Just the kind of stuff that you might imagine when you're talking about a national level gang. But those guys locally, there was only like 5 or 6 of them. Right. And so, but they would have a meeting every Sunday, and they had they had a recorder, and they had a treasurer, and they'd collect dues, and it was a whole nine. It was as legitimate as it comes. There's not a lot of that. Most of it is a bunch of knuckleheads carrying around a bunch of guns, selling 50 pieces of crack on the street, and trying to own corners as opposed to somebody else, Yeah. That's mostly what they're doing.
Can you walk us through what wiretapping someone or sending in a CI or something like that.
What it's like?
Yeah, what it's like. How does it start from bottom to the top? How does that start?
Yeah, so I'll give you the basics. We'll talk about the basics, right? Yeah. There's obviously some tricks of the trade that we'll keep for ourselves, but it's a lot of it comes with a lot of it starts with an informant, right? Somebody who has been arrested, who wants to work. Do some work for law enforcement to make their lives better, right? Work off some time.
A snitch? Is that what you mean?
You can call it a snitch, right? We'd like to call it a confidential informant. And believe it or not, as much as you may want to believe it, most people talk, right? Most people talk. They'll like to tell you they don't talk, But most people, when they're looking at least serious time, you're talking to somebody about putting them away for 25 for selling a couple of kilos. They're going to come in and have a conversation with it. They don't want to go to prison for 25 years, right? So there's a lot of people that have that will come in and have a conversation, right? And so that's oftentimes what happens. Somebody's willing to do some work, and so they'll find us a target, somebody they've been dealing with before, or somebody they know, or whatever. Somebody, doesn't matter, and we will sign them up as a confidential informant. We'll give them some money. We'll send them out to do a buy. We'll record the buy. And for a lot of our work at LCTF, we want to do wires. We were a wire office. So it's not that we couldn't do other cases. It's not like we wouldn't do a buy bust here or there, but it wasn't really what we are designed to do, right? A lot of PDs can do buy busts with their younger investigators and detectives all day long that don't have wire equipment. Well, we have wire equipment, and it's really expensive, and it can really help take down organizations of people. So we were constantly looking for where we could start the next wire, not just the next person selling a 50 piece, right? So we would give them a phone. And as long as they are able to conduct the transaction over the phone and they used that device, then now that device, that's the inroads to the wire, right? We could articulate to a judge that the individual who's selling the CI this stuff, they're doing it through this medium. They're doing it through the phone. And so that, through a whole host of ways, we'll end up putting an affidavit together, and then we do what we would mostly do is multiple buys into one target. We wouldn't just do it one time, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, whatever it is. Take those 5 events and say to a judge, he or she has used this phone 5 times to sell this product, whatever it is, and then the judge would allow us to wiretap that phone. So we don't do it everywhere. We don't wiretap everybody's phone. That we don't have the money or the time to do that, or the interest. Really, it's mostly about if they're using that type of a device. If the target is using that device, or they're using email or using a phone, and that's how they do their business, then we'll just use that avenue to investigate their organization. If they're not using phones, then we'll find other ways to investigate. But again, just so happened my office was the wire office, so.
Got it. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I was always paranoid when I was a kid, just buying nickel bags and dime bags. My phone was tapped and they were going to come get me.
Yeah, nobody's wiretapping a dime bag guy, right? If they are, it's an abuse of funds, right? It's not that you can't. I guess you wouldn't. But so, anyways, and then we would get it again. We'd present an affidavit to the judge. The judge would sign off on a warrant, and then we would be able to eavesdrop. That's the legal term. Eavesdrop on that person's phone for 30 days. And we would do it through the phone company. So we don't have to do the old school stuff where you actually literally tap somebody's wire at the end of their driveway because they have a house phone. Yeah. Which is where the title comes from, wiretapping. But nowadays, everything's cell phones. And even if it's not, it's a landline, it's still digital. So you can still do it through the phone company. We present this order to a phone company and say, you're just going to mirror all of this stuff that's happening to their phone. You're just going to send it to us too. And so everything that goes to them goes to us. Nothing changes for them. They don't miss anything. Their phone works exactly the way that it was always working. We just get a carbon copy, almost like a CC on an email. They just give us all the same stuff. And we would have an opportunity to listen for 30 days. And we would have to, at the end of that 30 days, go back to the judge and say, hey, this person is continuing to use this device to sell drugs. Here are the phone calls they made, and we did all the transcripts, and we determined what they were saying. And they talked to all these phone numbers, and we did surveillance, and we watched him meet this person or that person or whatever. And now, look, we're looking, and this organization is opening up. We found out who this person is now getting this type of product. It looks like he's getting his cocaine from this guy, or maybe his heroin from this guy, but we have no idea who those people are, and we have no idea where they're getting their product from. But I know they're using their phone to do it because we started on this guy's phone. So that will prove to the judge that the original guy is still good to go. We need another 60 days because we haven't figured everything out yet. And we might ask, hey, can I have 30 days on the next 2 guys? And if the judge thinks there's enough evidence for that, he may say yes. So now we'll be up on 3 phones. We'll be on the second tour of the first guy and the first tour of the second 2 phones. And then we can continue to branch off from there. And if these guys are talking to more guys, and we'll just keep jumping the rope until we get to wherever we go, right? The end of the case.
Are people humans listening to every single second? Like, do you have AI by now that'll pick up like heroin or like keywords?
No, because legally you can't do that.
Okay.
Right? So I myself have listened to tens of thousands of phone calls. You can imagine how many text messages and videos that I've seen, and none of them are a lot of them aren't G-rated. Let's put it that way. But some disturbing stuff. You can imagine what people do on their phones. Nonetheless, you have to listen to the phone call live, and it has to be listened to by an investigator or a detective, somebody that's sworn, and somebody that's been approved by the prosecutor to do that. So, and if you don't have those three things, then you can't listen to the phone, right? So what happens is the phone, let's say a phone call goes up on somebody's phone, right? Some Joe's got an incoming phone call. We're wiretapping that phone, and he gets ready to pick it up. Let me just say this. So he gets ready to pick up the phone, okay? And we'll get a notification on the system that we're using that a phone call is coming to this target that we're listening to, right? That phone call is never going to be heard. It's never recorded. It never actually is saved anywhere in the system at all. It's just a simple light that goes off until a human being clicks on it. And a human being has to sit there and listen to that phone call live for the whole time that it's on. If that human being has to leave, not listening to the phone call anymore. And the reason is because we don't have the legal authority to listen to every single part of a conversation if it doesn't have anything to do with the crime we told the judge that we're investigating. So when somebody that we're wiretapping is talking to their mom about innocuous stuff about going to the mall, that's not for us to listen to, right? That's private conversation that doesn't help us with our case. And so a human has the ability to determine within a few minutes if that call is what we call pertinent or non-pertinent. If it's non-pertinent, we have to stop listening. We literally just stop listening to that phone call, and they go off and they do whatever they do. We would never be in a position where we can not listen because it's just not in the law. We have to be there to do it.
Do you build almost like a connection with this drug dealer or whoever just by sitting there listening to, like, not a connection, but like you feel like you kind of know that person 100%. Really well?
Yeah. You imagine how much you get to know somebody when you're listening to their phone for 9 months. Right. It's people. These are people I'll never forget. I know where they live. I know where their family lives. I know where their sisters live. I know where they went to school. I just know. You just happen to come across that stuff when you're listening to their phone while they're out there selling these drugs or selling guns or doing whatever they're doing. They eventually have normal conversations that are intermixed with their pertinent conversations about drugs and whatever else. And yeah, you know where they go on vacation. You just know where they live their life. And that's, so that's why there are so many regulations and rules behind conducting a wiretap, because it's the most intrusive option law enforcement has. Right? You're listening to somebody's phone, you're getting everything. You're getting their text, you're getting their pictures, you're getting everything. And rightfully so, it's not our business to have everyone's whole life just because they're breaking the law, right? I mean, we want to be able to know what they're doing when they are breaking the law, but judges don't just give us full access to everything and just say, go have fun and we'll see you in a few months, right? That's not the way our founding fathers, in my opinion, would want business to be done, right? You just need whatever you need to be able to prove their guilt and then move on with life. So and again, the system is set up that way. So we have to prove so many elements of evidence. We have to go back to the judge every 30 days. We have to listen to phone calls live. We have to have certain investigators that are signed off to do it. You can't just take some random, traffic officer and put them on a case. You can't do that just because they're a cop. So all of these things to ensure that we're not, overreaching what the law's given us the right to do, the authority.
So when you're in the drug game, more times than not, you are probably seeing drug abusers selling drugs or even that lifestyle in general. It's not a normal lifestyle. Like it's probably extremely stressful, mental health wise. What do you see from some of the people you were going after and tapping their phones and doing intelligence on from a mental health perspective? it's something that is very common in your field.
Yeah,
with
absolutely.
drugs.
I would say, the first thing to remember is that you only have a narcotics game if you have somebody at the end who's using.
Right.
So every single person, and that might seem obvious, but sometimes gets lost in the mix when you're thinking about, again, somebody that's carrying a gun and doing gang stuff and they're selling ounces to people. You lose out on the fact that eventually that stuff ends up with people that are literally sitting on their couch using that stuff every single day, right? And so, but law enforcement, at least in my experience, we don't spend a lot of time from an investigative standpoint dealing with those people. Those people are people that need help. They're not people that need to end up being in prison, right? Sometimes we come across them, obviously, in an investigation, and because we eventually get down to what we call the user level, right? From wherever we are in our case, from the source of supply all the way down to the users. So, but we're not interested in arresting users. But what we do happen to end up doing, and this is where we get the cross mix between the mental health issue and the illegality, is people that are using and have a problem, and then they end up selling in order to feed their habit. And if they're selling, now you've ended up in a whole different world. If you're just using, again, not that that's not illegal in its own right, but it's not something we necessarily pay attention to. We're not running around every time somebody buys a bag of heroin, okay? But if somebody shows up and sells them 6 bags of heroin that they're going to use over the next 2 days, then that person selling is a different animal, right? But a lot of times at that level meaning they're not selling a whole bunch, they're selling 6 bags or they're selling, 150 grams of crack that's going to go to 3 people. Those people are often doing it because they're using and they have a problem. And so I've had plenty of experiences ending up investigating somebody who is selling and furthering the furthering the organization, but we find out later that they're doing it again just to feed their habit. And we try to deal with them in a way that doesn't keep them down, right? And doesn't keep them in a place where they feel that they have to do that for the rest of their life. So I'll give you one example of one of my favorite stories from my time was we had a female that was reselling a pretty decent amount. That's all relative, I guess. A decent amount would be ounce and a half every once in a while, every couple of days here in Albany, and powder coke. And she was doing it because she had a problem herself, and the guy that she was dating was her source. And so he would drive up. He didn't care about her at all. He was from New York. He met her up here in Albany. He would drive up here. He would drop off a bunch of ounces to her, and he would make her resell here in Albany. And then she would even drive up to Saratoga and even further north, and she would sell stuff up there. And she got an apartment up there and whatever. So, and we ended up going on her phone because she's selling all over the Capital District, right? I mean, whether you have a problem or not, she's still feeding the rest of the, so. She eventually got arrested, long story short, and I sat down with her and sat down with the prosecutors and, determined what her life story was, and that's really what it was. She was just doing what she was doing to try and survive because she was really addicted. So she was offered what anybody else would be offered in her position through her defense attorney, and offered the opportunity to do some work for herself and maybe not end up in jail for doing what she was doing. And she decided to do just that. She felt that was the best option for her. Her defense attorney felt the same way. So we ended up working together for a while, and she nowhere near got in trouble in the way that she would have. This is a first-time arrest for her. She had no record. And I had caught up with her. As a matter of fact, I don't even think she saw a day in jail other than her initial arrest, based on how the case turned out. Let's just say that. And I ended up catching up with her digitally on Facebook years later, 2 or 3 years later. She was out, had nothing to do. She was out of some mental health locations that she was in, some places that she was in. And she was a counselor, and she was helping other people get off drugs and helping them with their mental status, and got away from the whole game. And as far as I know today, I mean, I haven't seen her in a long time or connected with her, but as far as I know, she's still doing great things and she's off. And so I loved that aspect of the job. And I'll be honest, not every cop looks at it that way, right? A lot of people look at it like no one forced you to make that decision and you ended up doing the wrong thing. So You got to do the time for doing the crime, whatever. I just didn't approach life that way, right? One way's not better than the other. It's just how I looked at it. And I'm glad to know that at this point she's doing well and she's not ending up back in somebody else's case somewhere later because she's addicted again and doing something else for some knucklehead in New York, you know?
So you're sober.
I am.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know if I could have said it on the camera, but
No,
okay.
that's
So
good.
do you think there is a piece of you, since you are in sobriety 8 years, was it?
Yeah, 8 years.
8 years, that has like a little piece of empathy in you? I mean, yeah, like that full story moment you just shared.
Yeah.
You said yourself, that's what it's all about, right? That full circle moment. But there are also other law enforcement officials out there that really don't care about that.
Yep.
Have you seen your sobriety empathy with that tied in to some of the people you're working against?
100%. Yeah. And it's, you know, some of the things that happened while I was drinking up until 2016, and it got bad for a couple of years before I got sober, thankfully. And you know, that's something I wouldn't, in a lot of ways, wouldn't want to go through again, right? A lot of damage to a lot of friendships and family and a lot of things. But at the same token, it's kind of like what Ian says when he's talking on his show, that it was the best thing to ever happen to him when he got jammed up. And it's this kind of the same way for me. Obviously, I didn't get jammed up legally, but I got jammed up personally. And I could have ended up losing my military career, my law enforcement career. I could have ended up losing my life. Where I was in a place that if I kept going, I am confident I wouldn't be alive today. So that experience opened my eyes and allowed me to see everybody else that I was dealing with on the law enforcement side very differently. And I really got to, in my mind, parse out who I thought were just evil people, right? Just people that, you know, don't care about anybody else. They're on the street. They're going to hurt somebody. They don't care who it is. And they're just going to sell. They don't use themselves. And now we could get into a deep conversation about why they're there in the first place and their whole family history. I got it. But from my perspective, in the moment, there were people that were not struggling with any issues. They were just bad folks that we needed to get off the street because they were going to hurt somebody. And then they're the ones that weren't. And when I first got on the job, it was easy for me to fall into the trap of, if I was a cop, I was good. And then if I wasn't a cop and somebody was on the other end of the phone, they were bad or potentially bad. It was a very simplistic view. I go through my struggles. I end up realizing that even good people, at least I consider myself good, right, at some level, that can make some really poor choices, and they can end up getting themselves jammed up and in some bad places, some of which are their fault or not their fault, called a disease, whatever you want to call it. And those people on the other end of the phone are just like me. They just ended up in a different part of life. Maybe they just got a little unlucky. Maybe I got lucky. I don't know. But, and, you know, I don't want to leave you to the impression that, you know, I was sitting in the corner of our office while everybody else is doing the hard work. And I'm like, no, let's save everyone, you know, like that. I'm not saying that. Okay. But I did have a different view. Right? It was easier for me based on my experience. So yes, I say that empathy is an emotion in really a mindset that I have today that I didn't have 8 years ago. No doubt.
Are you part of the takedowns as well? Once you have enough information on someone?
In the beginning, they were fun, and then they get tiring. Right?
Really?
Yeah, because you get up at 4 a.m, and everyone's like, all right, we meet at this big parking lot, and there's 80 cops down there. And because usually when you do a takedown, there's, in a case like ours, there's multiple defendants. You're doing all 30, 40, 50, 60 defendants in one morning. So, or you're at least trying to get all of them in one morning. So you've got 80, 90, 100 cops, and they're all meeting in a parking lot, and you're giving everybody their assignment, if you will. And this group has, you're going after these 5 guys, and you're going to go these 5 guys, and you're going to go here. And again, you're there at like the crack of dawn and earlier than that. And yeah, in the beginning, it was a lot of fun. You know, I remember sitting up my first time going on a takedown. I don't even know if we had a search warrant or not. Just we're going after somebody. And my boss is like, all right, man, you know, fresh out of the academy, and let's go do this. I'll see you at 4 a.m. at Price Chopper, whatever it is. You know? And I was like up all night. It was like exciting,
So
you know?
pumped.
And then 10 years into it, you're like, oh God, we got to take down tomorrow. And it's all fulfilling and it's great. You're listening to somebody's phone for a year and they're one of those people on the bad guy side, right? In my last case I had, my final target in my last case before I transitioned back to the Army full time was a guy that was undocumented, obviously wasn't from here, had been booted out of the U.S. multiple times, snuck back in, and this was his third time, I think, back in country, and he's just all over the country. He's bringing in fentanyl over the border in Arizona. He's getting it from undocumented Mexicans down there. He ends up bringing it back to Chicago, Albany, Schenectady, New York. He's all over the place. Could care less. People are dying. It's not of no interest to him. He just wants to continue to be in the United States illegally, sell more fentanyl, and make more money. When Takedown comes that day and we get to go get that guy, and I know he's sleeping in a hotel, and like he was that day, and when we got him, and we knew that he was going to have no idea we were knocking on his door at 5:30 in the morning in this hotel, and he was coming with us. That was still a good day, right? Like that's still fun. And it was good to get him in the car and have him tell me he didn't do it, right, for an hour while I drove him down to New York or whatever. But I was part of all of that and it was a lot of fun.
Did you ever have a takedown go wrong?
Go wrong in what way? Like somebody got hurt or something?
They started shooting at you?
No. We didn't have any, not in my experience.
Yeah.
I didn't have anything bad that way. Do we have people run? Absolutely. That happens, right? Doesn't happen as often as you may think. I mean, most times when, 15 cops show up to a house, and even if you don't have a search warrant, even if we only have a body warrant, I mean, we can only get that person, but we know that person's in the house. Even the tough guys, when they see 15 cops on the front step and they see 5 of them in the backyard, most of the time they're like, all right, what do you want? I'm coming, right? I just don't want to deal with this, whatever it is. So you don't often run into issues, but you do, right? Maybe 20% of the time somebody takes off. Somebody slams the door and goes and hides in the bedroom. Somebody wants to fight. That happens. Doesn't happen often, but it does, and you just got to be ready, and you do it. We often find guns in the house. We'll find loaded weapons. We find drugs. We find a whole host of stuff. But thankfully, in my experience, I haven't had anybody open the door and point a gun at you and say, that's it, it's over, right? Thankfully. Again, it does happen, but.
How often have they gotten away?
I've never had anybody get away that's been anywhere near us. Meaning, like, I've never hit a door and somebody took off and we couldn't find them. That's never happened. And we've never been in a scenario where we've had somebody in a house and we know they're in a house and we're sitting on the outside because I don't have a search warrant. So again, we just have a body warrant and they've gotten away. We've definitely had warrants issued for people where we go to find them on takedown day, and we've been working, for weeks. So what we like to do is we know when we're going to end up doing a takedown, right? So we try to do as much intel as we can on all these folks, so we know where they are that morning, right? So we know what we're doing. And we go to this house or whatever. And yeah, occasionally we'll show up and they're just not there. I don't know where they went. Sometimes we just get unlucky and they jumped on a plane and the day before and they didn't even know we were coming. Obviously, this is a secret indictment out of a grand jury. They have no idea we're coming. And whatever, they got on a plane and they took off. Somebody wasn't sitting on the house for that instant or whatever. And now we got to go find them. So, and they eventually get found. I mean, I traveled numerous times, Pennsylvania, Florida, to go pick up defendants who got picked off down in Miami, and then I have to fly down there and bring them all the way back because they got caught. It happens all the time.
So leading up to 2016, when you got sober,
yeah,
what was that like? And did your time in the Army, like in Iraq, play a part in your drinking?
Yeah. I don't know, right? I can only assume yes, right? And I went to Iraq in 2005. I was in Afghanistan in 2012, and I did Kuwait in 2020. Afghanistan and Iraq were obviously very different than Kuwait. And those are combat zones. Kuwait's not a combat zone. And, I had always drank in my college years and a little older, I had always drank as much as any other heavy drinker would, right? Like any other, normal, quote unquote, normal cop / military folk drinks, that's how much I drank, right? And I'm not saying that's normal in terms of a societal standard, but in terms of our professional standard, it was just as normal as anybody else, okay? And meaning it didn't affect my life in any negative way. Yeah, we went to the bar after work and those kind of things, but it didn't affect my family, it didn't affect my wife, didn't affect the understanding. I was just living life that way. But when I got back from Afghanistan at the end of 2012, it definitely took a turn for the worse. And so for really from like the end of 2013 until August of 2016, it was bad and got worse every day, you know? I don't know how to say how bad it got. It got bad enough where, again, if I kept down the same path, there's no way that I'd be alive today. I would have either cracked up my car or I had significant health issues. I had enzyme tests and my doctor's like, dude, you're going to drink yourself into a grave. I was 38 years old, 36 years old, you know? And anyways, so I can only say I think so. Right. I don't have any other experiences in my life other than military and law enforcement that I can identify that may have helped put me in that position. Right. I do believe, based on the things that I learned after I got sober, that there's a component to me that makes it easier for me to be a drunk than somebody else. I do believe that's the case. I do believe everyone's made up differently. Genetics are different. That's where the whole disease concept comes from. That doesn't mean that everybody that maybe has the same genetic makeup that I do ends up being an alcoholic. I'm not saying that. But I do certainly think that my experiences, when you tie that in to who I am as a person, just made it easier.
Yeah.
There's no doubt. And I'm not, even though I've been sober for 8 years and knock on wood, I'm still going strong. I'm not going to test it. I'm just not, because it was bad. And I have this fear, this deep fear that I am that person who's, sometimes I say the person who's got the bug. Like, I'm the person who has the bug, and if it happens again, there's no coming back.
Yeah, once you have that first one, it's off to the races.
Yeah, maybe I'm that person, maybe I'm not. I don't know, but I'm not testing it.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
So I'm the same way.
Yeah.
Well, I actually do know I'm that person. So, what do you do today for your sobriety to keep yourself in check? And
another good question. I don't know. I just don't. Right. My family is really my biggest support. If I wasn't married, I probably would have kept drinking. My wife was so critical. I'll never forget the day she looked at me and said, she was trying for months to really work with me and try to get to a point where I wasn't killing myself and ruining my life or whatever. And it just wasn't working. And, I remember the day where she looked at me and said, this is it, right? You don't figure this thing out. It's not that I don't care about you, but you're going to end up ruining the kids' lives. And so knock it off or I'm leaving, right? Like, I already went to the lawyer. Here's all the paperwork. Figure it out. And, if you can't, like I said, I'm out. And if you happen to get this thing figured out and you come back, you're more than welcome to come back. But if you start drinking again, that's it. It's over. I'm not even giving you a shot. So in part, it's that pressure. It's that fear, if you will, that, my wife's going to leave and she's going to take my kids. I couldn't live like that, So that helps every single day. Like, it's not worth it, right? Another Coors Light is not worth that for me, and that seems to help.
Well, it sounds like you have really focused on and heightened your awareness around the compulsivity of the disease.
Yeah.
And not just acting on it, and more so thinking about consequences and taking accountability for those consequences.
Yeah.
Because I feel like for myself, for a very long time, I lacked taking accountability.
Yeah.
And once I started to take accountability, then things kind of just every area of my life continued to develop and evolve. And I became, a person after some time out of nowhere with all this responsibility. And that keeps me further from another drink or a drug.
Right.
Yeah. So kudos to you for building that awareness and, playing that tape through and understanding the consequences and taking accountability for the actions that you took prior to 2016 to get you where you were.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Same to you. I mean, and I know full well how much of a challenge it is,
Yeah.
And I do really feel for people, and I'm not saying you're in this spot because I don't know your story, but the people that I was getting sober with, the people that I was in AA with for the time that I went rather regularly and struggled, right? And then there's people in AA that don't really struggle, right? They're not the real drunks that you occasionally find them. But most people in AA are real drunks.
Yeah.
And when they come in and they're alone, I don't know how they do it, to be honest with you. I don't know how, because I didn't have to deal with that. So, I can't take that credit in that way, right? Like these people, 25 years old, 30 years old, not dating anybody, don't have a family, lost their best friends because of all the decisions they've made. And they live in an apartment by themselves every day with no one to hold them accountable but themselves. And they just get up and go to AA the next day and they just don't drink. When I first got out, right, because I went to rehab for 17 days. I went out west, Western New York, not California. But when I got out of rehab, in the first few months, it was easy. Because it just was like, I'm not doing this.
It's a mindset.
I felt like crap right when I was drinking. So when I stopped drinking, I felt great. And I'm like, this is just great. Well, at like the 6-month mark, I was like, am I really right? Am I really a drunk? Maybe I could. I think in that moment, if I didn't have my support, my family, my wife, my job, because I was able to keep my job at the Attorney General's office. And
it's amazing.
They could have fired me in a minute. And probably should have, really. Should have just said, not that I did anything necessarily overtly that anybody would have known, right? But I wasn't hiding all of it, right? And they could have walked in and just been like, bro, you got to go. But again, if I didn't have that support in 6 months, I don't know what I would have done. I don't know. I hope I would have been able to power through and get to a point where I am today, but I don't know.
Yeah. What piece of advice would you have for the listener who's on the fence about getting so they're there, you remember those days where you wanted to pull the trigger and get sober, but you kind of couldn't, and you couldn't make that decision to really do it. What piece of advice would you have for that person?
Oh, that's a good question. For me, I had, the AA has all of their sayings, right? And the one that sticks out most to me is I got sick and tired of being sick and tired, right? And so it was such a hassle to, the last year that I was drinking, to find my way, to find another drink, to hide it in my room, because my wife at that point didn't want me drinking at all. I'm hiding it in the garage. I'm putting money in my sneakers to try to get it, just like. And eventually that just got so tiring, right? And then physically and mentally, I was really breaking down. The piece of advice that I would give is to just let go, right? Just take a breath and let go. Don't beat yourself up about it. Give yourself an opportunity to just let go. Let the thoughts come through and see where they take you and see if they can get you to that point to switch over. You know what I mean? Because I was constantly arguing with myself about how it wasn't true. Right? I was constantly saying, no matter how many crappy things I did, no matter how bad I felt, no matter how many tests my doctor gave back to me and said, bro, your enzymes are of like somebody who should be dead. I could argue with myself that it wasn't the case, or I would fix it soon. I couldn't ever let go. Eventually, I got to that day where I was able to let go. It's a day I'll never forget. I was at my brother's house and I called my boss and I called a colleague of mine and I just said, I can't do it anymore, right? I let go and I stopped fighting all those arguments in my head and was able to, get out into rehab for a few weeks, and here I am. I changed my life.
It's amazing.
Stop having that argument, just let go.
Yeah, and ask for help. You reached out to your colleague, you said, and
yeah.
It's okay to ask for help.
And I was so surprised when there was no animosity. Nobody was like jumping on me, and these are like cops, right? Cops that have been around a long time too. These aren't kids. The guys that I had worked with, most of the guys that I had worked with, guys and gals that I had worked with, they've been on the job 25, 30 years, They're the old drunk cops from the 80s, they've seen it all. And they were like, it wasn't like, suck it up, kid, let's get back into the bar. They were like,
be a man.
Yeah. Hey, John, listen, what can I do? And we kind of noticed things were a little sideways. So let's get this thing straight, right? What do you need? Well, I don't know what I need, but somebody needs to help me figure it out. And then people I'll call this place, I'll do this thing, whatever. And it's just great.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, John, thank you. I
thanks for
appreciate
having
you
me.
coming out and sharing your experience and everything with the work you do on a daily basis and keeping our streets safe.
Yeah. Trying to. Yeah.
One tap at a time.
Yeah, right. Thanks
Thanks again, man.
Appreciate it.